Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar from the Turkish Academy of Management Critical Management Studies Interest Group is hosting this webinar, and we are very happy to have Sverre Spoelstra from Lund University and Copenhagen Business School together with us. He's going to talk about can objects be leaders? His speech is going to be titled as this. And before we start, I'm going to give you some preliminary practical information about the talk. Sverre is going to have like 30 to 35 minutes, and then we have 5-10 minutes for Q&A. I will just give a quick introduction of who Sverre is. I'm sure if you are interested in the critical management studies, you know his work, but he holds a dual academic position, both at the Lund University and the Copenhagen Business School. His research focuses on leadership, organizational philosophy, the interplay between work and play, theological motives in management thinking, and academic inquiry. His current work encompasses two primary projects. One of them is a sociological investigation into gamification and digital management within high-performance organization, and the other one is about philosophical examination of the relationship between leading and commanding. He's the author of Leadership and Organization, a Philosophical Introduction, which was published from Routledge in 2018 and holds the position of associate editor for the journal Organization. His solo and co-authored research published in highly reputable journals in our field, such as Journal of Business Ethics, Management Learning, Organization Studies, and our dear ephemera, Theory and Politics in Organization. Among other co-authors, he is frequently co-authoring with our dear friend Nick Butler. Say hi to Nick as well. And he's also one of the few people that I know who managed to stop aging. So keep on what you have been doing so far. And without further ado, over to you, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Ozan, for the kind introduction and for inviting me. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I hope we get a chance to talk about the research that I will be presenting. When Ozan asked me to do something on leadership, I had a choice to do something that is fairly well developed, something published, and something new. And I decided to go with something new, something that I'm thinking about at the moment. And yeah, so this is very much work in process. The question of whether objects can be leaders. I will say a bit about where that question comes from for me, and also how it's been dealt with so far in leadership literature. This is a very much a conceptual journey. This paper that I've started writing on, so it's at the moment it's not more than 4 pages, and I think I'm a little bit further in my thoughts, but we'll see. So Ozan, you mentioned Nick Butler, and I have started a new research project on algorithmic leadership together with Nick, but also with other colleagues at Lund, Emilie Hesselbo, Johan Jönsson, and Peter Svensson. And what we are empirically exploring there, so I'm not going to be saying much about the results, the findings, partly because we don't have so many yet. We've just started. But the question that I'm asking today has its background in these projects. The question that we're asking in those projects is, how does algorithmic input change the relation between leaders or managers, group leaders, and employees? And what we're particularly interested in is the role of certain digital objects, as they are sometimes called. That could be an app that collects data of employees on a weekly basis. So employees are asked to fill out a questionnaire fairly regularly, and that results in advice to managers. Sometimes it also results in feedback directly to employees. So we see here that an object, in this case a digital object, starts to mediate the relation between managers and employees. And we're interested in what that does. Now, one of the things that we started talking about is that, okay, such objects can mediate the leadership of a manager, a leader, but can it also take over? Can it also become the dominant party, so to speak, where the leader starts to follow the tool? Now, obviously, empirically speaking, this can happen. Yeah, when you start to rely on algorithmic input and you don't really decide yourself anymore, then effectively the tool is taking over. But I feel that it's a bit more complicated than that, because we use leadership in a particular way. We have certain connotations with leadership. And as soon as we are becoming aware of an object doing the leading, so to speak, then we would quickly say that we don't have leadership anymore. And this is because we very much associate leadership with exceptionally human qualities or characteristics, right? So the true leadership is about authenticity. It's about maybe spirituality. It's about charisma. It's not about calculability. It's not about data analysis, even though that might at some point comes in. So this question whether objects, digital or just material objects, can lead, I find interesting, not only as a kind of conceptual, theoretical question in its own right, but also as a way of starting to reflect upon the future and what algorithms or digital objects are doing in a work context and what they might be doing in the future in terms of leadership. So that's the background. And then, of course, the first thing when you embark on a question like that is to figure out what's already there. What have people already been writing about the objects in relation to leadership? And, you know, there is a small literature on this. It's also quite interesting. And I've noticed that, especially in recent years, there have been more and more leadership scholars addressing this question. So when we look at the development of leadership studies, one way of narrating this development would be to say that heroic leadership notions used to be dominant. I guess they still are in the mainstream. In critical leadership studies or in critical management studies, they clearly are not. Now, what is the heroic? What is an heroic notion of leadership? What is this idea that leadership can be reduced to the actions of one single individual, traditionally male? So we have the 19th century great man tradition. We have Max Weber's notion of charismatic leadership and its popularity from the 1970s onwards in business. So that's the idea of heroic leadership, and that's of course been criticized a lot for two main reasons. One is heroic leadership is an undesirable form of leadership. Now, I won't go through all of the kind of reasons why that is undesirable, but putting power in the hands of one single individual has its disadvantages. Let's put it that way. The other one, and that's the direction that I'm following today, is more methodological, which is to say that if we think of leadership as something that comes forth out of one individual, we are fooling ourselves. So even when we talk about, say, the leadership of Donald Trump or Steve Jobs or whoever we pick as kind of a typical heroic leader, when we do a close-up study, so to speak, we see that that leadership is dependent on so many other factors. Yeah, it is the context that is important. It is followers who are giving legitimacy to a particular individual. Instead of understanding leadership as the accomplishment of one single individual, we should be seeing leadership as an accomplishment of many different factors or relations coming together. Sometimes this is referred as a post-heroic perspective. Now, what is still missing so far is the role of material objects. So in some of the recent discussions, this decentering of heroic leadership goes further in saying, well, it's not only history, context, followers that influence leadership and that allow leadership to take place. There are also material elements. And so this is then Keith Green's well-known professor in critical leadership studies, also in critical management studies, who says that leadership is essentially hybrid in nature. It comprises humans, but also comprises material elements, clothes, adornments, cultures, rules, and so on and so forth. There are in effect almost no cases of successful human leadership bereft of any non-human supplement that is naked, right? So the claim here is that leadership is a complex relation between all kinds of different elements. And as soon as we reduce leadership to either one single leader or a relation between leaders and followers, we miss part of the picture. So I think this all makes sense. So I'm not criticizing this, but I think I will have something to add to this idea. So here's just a simple example, right? The black turtleneck of Steve Jobs. The claim would be that somehow this has helped him in establishing authority, right? So his authority partly goes through the turtleneck in the sense that it makes him stand out. Yeah, it's unusual to always wear the same clothes. And in the heroic tradition, leaders are seen as extraordinary, so being out of the ordinary. So wearing this piece of clothing helped him to be perceived as extraordinary. And then it has come to become, or it has become associated with creativity and so on and so forth. So this is a simple example of how a material object is part of the leadership situation, if you will. Here, I think it's also clear that we would not quickly speak of the turtleneck as the leader, right? We would still be talking about Steve Jobs as the leader. So in this case, it's not the case that the object can become the dominant role. We might see it more as a supportive role. But this is challenged from an actor network theory perspective, from a new materialism or new materialist perspective, where we are encouraged to approach the material and non-material elements, or the human and non-human elements in leadership in a flat ontology. So where one is not necessarily primary over others because of their nature. And this, I think, is where it gets a bit complicated. Now, I will first consider, before I will get to what I think will be my argument. So again, this is work in process. I will briefly say something about a very famous example in actor network theory, namely Latour's hotel key, which you might have seen. I think many of you will probably be familiar with this example. Now, this is a managerial case because we have a hotel manager, and the hotel manager wants something, namely that guests return the key to the reception. Otherwise, keys get lost, and that's annoying because in earlier times you would have to break open doors and so on, right? So what is it that the manager can do to achieve their goal? Well, the first thing would be to request guests, please leave the key at the reception. But then, practically speaking, not everybody does because they can't be bothered, because they think it's too much trouble, because maybe there was nobody at the reception. There could be all kinds of reasons. So what else can the manager do to make more people comply? Now, one thing could be, the next thing could be to have a written sign that reminds guests to bring the key back to the reception. But then the material in innovation, I think that's one that you don't see that much anymore. Occasionally, you still do, would be to put a weight on the key, as you can see here in the pictures. So now it becomes rather unattractive to drag this heavy weight around. Yeah, it doesn't fit so nicely in your pockets anymore. So you are encouraged by the material object to return the key to the reception. So this is a figure that you find in a famous and very well cited article by Latour from 1987, where you see what he calls the program. So this is the idea is to kind of bring the key back to the reception, and we see the first figure there is the hotel manager, and in number one there is just the key. And then the anti-program, there are all the guests who are not bringing the key back to the reception. So then in number two, the hotel manager says, please bring back your key. And then a few, as you can see, some of the hotel guests, they actually bring back the key. Number three, you hang up a sign and you also say it, please bring back the key. And then even more people bring back the key. And then in number four, the weight is put on the key. And then most people, except for a few guests and the dog, do not bring back the key. So you can say this is a very successful case of management where a managerial intention and a kind of a daily problem or issue for management for management is resolved through translating a program into a material object. Now, what I find interesting here in this example is that it is so clearly a case of management and not of leadership. And what I mean by that is that from a leadership perspective, we would be invited to read this case or approach this case as a lack of leadership. Because if you would have a real leader, and I use quotation marks here and with a little bit of irony, when you have a real leader, you don't need to put weights onto a key. You just need a charismatic leader that everybody kind of believes in and looks up to. And then we do not have this divide between management and guests, yeah, or the program and the anti-program. We have traditionally been invited to understand true leadership as something that creates a collective out of individuals with their own wills. Yeah, and that's clear in charismatic leadership or transformational leadership. So now I am referring to the kind of heroic tradition of leadership. So this strikes me as interesting because of a concept that is also used in this literature, which is black boxing. And black boxing means that you is a forgetting. It's a forgetting of the material aspects that contribute to the possibility of leadership, right? So I think we have this here. But so when heroic leadership, and this is kind of very simple, very schematic, where heroic leadership kind of equates leadership with the leader, post-heroic leadership equates leadership to a combination of leader, followers, and context. This is a formulation from distributed leadership, but there are other ways of potential ways of putting this. And then actor network theory and new materialism goes further in saying that leadership is a combination of leader, the person recognized as a leader, followers, context, as well as material objects. They take a relational approach. So this is a little bit of a shortcut. My argument, or at least the argument that I am pursuing here, is that leadership is all of that, but it's also black boxing itself. So in other words, for leadership to exist, for phenomena to come into being that we recognize as leadership, black boxing needs to be part of the phenomenon. In other words, we must forget that the material aspects, or perhaps also the context or the role of followers, in order to find or for leadership to come into being. Yeah, so it's not only a methodological error to say, well, we tend to think of leadership as resting on or resting with one single individual, but in reality, it's much more complicated. All those other things that need to be brought in. It's also black boxing itself that is part of the leadership phenomenon. That is kind of the idea that I am pursuing in the paper. And I think this is especially interesting for the context that we are now also empirically exploring, namely the context of digital objects. So let's take the example of an app that tells a manager or a leader what to do. So it could take employee analytics into account. For instance, a measurement of how engaged they are, how motivated they are. And then it can give instructions or advice to a leader on how to deal with that situation. So to the extent that the algorithm starts to dominate that relation, we could say that what is happening in reality is that the object is starting to do the leading instead of the human person, the group leader or manager. That's what objectively happens, you could say. But as soon as we recognize that this is what is happening, we stop talking about leadership, right? Because we then say, well, hang on, this person is not using their insight. It's not using their intuition. It's not using their gut feeling in making the decisions. It's being overrun by algorithms. What we have here is a lack of leadership, right? So that's the kind of the idea that I'm playing around with. I think it becomes even more interesting and troubling when we start to think further and think about the situation where we're not only unsure of what the source is, right? So when a leader or manager communicates a decision that is based on algorithmic input, or that is simply made by an algorithm, we could still think, well, hang on, it might be the person, right, who is talking to us, the real human leader or manager. But what happens when we're unsure whether it is actually a human person who is communicating with us or a bot? And this is not so far away anymore. I think in certain contexts, this is already happening. I got a phone call not too long ago from a bot talking to me. And I could recognize that as a bot quite quickly. But with all the advances in AI, it is clear that leadership at a distance may very well include voices that we might not recognize as a bot, that they can respond in ways that appears extremely human. And that, we're not quite sure anymore who is behind the voices or even images, videos that approach us. I would be interested in thinking more about, the consequences of that, and they seem to be quite troubling. And one of the first things I think is that we're not quite sure anymore. So our idea of whether this is leadership in the sense of intuition, insight, vision, and so on, or whether this is just machinic calculation, that becomes even more difficult to make. And how do we relate then to leadership of that kind? Do we start to approach them like kind of advertising, where we're kind of unsure whether we should buy into it or not, but we become dominated by it anyway, even when we don't believe the claims that come to us. What happens I think this is already a real issue. What happens in situations like military conduct, when a soldier doesn't know anymore where an order comes from, whether it has a human source in a general or not. I think those are also questions that I'm thinking about and trying to come into grasp with. Just finally, and then I'm curious to get your input and thoughts. This image of the mechanical Turk, which was it was a machine or automaton from 1790, and it was known as the first chess playing machine. And of course, it was an elaborate illusion. There was a person hidden inside the cabinet, a really good chess player who was making the moves, and the moves via very ingenious strings kind of translated to moves on the chessboard made by this mechanical Turk. And why was he called Turk? Because he looked like a Turk because of the Ottoman clothes that he was wearing. My suggestion is, what is happening now is that instead of we having the illusion that a human player is on top, in control of the game, playing the game, while a machine rather is playing the game. And in reality, there is a human being pulling the strings. I think what we see now increasingly is the reverse, right? That what is happening in reality is that that algorithms are coming to decide more and more and more, but that we still have human figures symbolically on top of the machine to suggest that there is still leadership in terms of all of those things that we associate with leadership. Insight and charisma and vision and value-laden leadership and so on and so forth, ethical judgment, perhaps even more importantly. So I think I will leave it here, and I welcome any kind of feedback, questions, comments that you may have.
Well,